Good evening and welcome to the Wednesday, April 27th, 2022 meeting of the East Lansing Planning Commission. Mr. Menzer, would you please call roll?
Chair Bowman.
Here.
Vice Chair Sullivan.
Here.
Commissioner Williams.
Here.
Commissioner Wolf.
Here.
Commissioner Lapine is absent tonight. Commissioner Wagner. Here. Commissioner Hendricks. He's not in the room currently, but we are expecting him.
Thank you. And we do have a quorum.
Yep.
That will move us on to item 1.2, approval of the agenda. I would entertain a motion to approve the agenda in front of us.
So moved.
Support.
That's been moved by Commissioner Wolf and seconded by Commissioner Williams. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, then we'll call for a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries. And then item 1.3, approval of the minutes of the March 9th, 2022 meeting. I would entertain a motion to approve those minutes.
So moved.
It's been moved by Commissioner Sullivan and seconded by Commissioner Wagner. Thank you, everybody, for participating this evening. Is there any discussion on that motion? Seeing none, we'll have a vote. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? That motion carries as well. We have no committees that are currently active. Staff reports, Mr. Menzer.
Greetings. Good evening, everyone. It's good to see you again. So the last time Commission met was back in March. A lot of things have changed since then. So we're happy to be here. I just have a couple things I'd like to run through. So typically at this time of the meeting, I will go through some updates from projects that the Planning Commission saw that have been through City Council, and I will start with that. So going back now to March 22, City Council had a public hearing for a fraternity at 251 West Grand River that was approved. They had a public hearing for 532 Ann Street. That was another fraternity establishment. They were denied, and more on that to come actually in a second here. So there was a public hearing for 1415 Michigan Ave. That was the adult use marijuana proposal, and that was a facility that already had the medical licensing and is proceeding to add adult sales to their project. That was tabled at that meeting for more information related to the ownership of that business. So they came back at the meeting on April 5 and were approved. At the April 5 meeting, 532 Ann Street, which was denied at March 22, it was brought up again as reconsideration. So it was denied. The mayor actually wasn't available at the meeting at March 22. So when it was denied at that meeting, the applicant requested that the council reconsider at their next meeting. So I've learned a lot about Robert's rules in that time since then. There is an option to do that, to reconsider a decision that was made, a denial. What that takes to bring it off to happen is that the motion has to be made by a person that voted down, that voted to deny the request. So the motion was made to add it to the agenda for reconsideration. It was discussed and it was denied again. So that special use permit has been denied and will not be back. There were also at that meeting public hearings for the rezonings that the Planning Commission discussed at this point a few months ago at 210 and 218, 224 Westlake Lansing Road. Those were both approved by council. There was a public hearing for a fraternity at 404 East Michigan. That request was tabled and has still not come back. So we're working with the applicant to sort that project out and are expecting that they will come back to the council for, we'll have to renotice it, but for that public hearing sometime in the next month, probably at their second meeting in May. So that's what happened at the April 5th meeting. At April 12th, on the heels of discussion for the fraternity at 532 Ann Street and the 404, there was a discussion about a moratorium for special use permits for fraternities and sororities. So at the April 12th discussion only meeting, council considered where to go with that. Ultimately, they chose not to proceed, and instead what our staff will be considering are some potential text amendments to the ordinance to clarify the special use permit process and potentially the condition, like the application materials and the possibly conditions or other provisions related to that. So it may or may not know, there is not a lot in the ordinance about fraternities and sororities. Basically a small section that talks about, hey, you've got to have ample parking to accommodate the potential uses. If this is identified as your particular chapter house, which is what it does, and we've learned a lot about how MSU treats fraternities. And if you have a chance to go back to that discussion-only meeting, it was very interesting because there were two representatives from Michigan State University that talked about the sophomore live on campus program, and just generally how they interact with fraternities and how they manage that world. So there's a lot of discussion about that and the policies, and one thing we're considering doing is adding some language to the ordinance to really clarify that process, make sure that we're getting the information that Planning Commission and City Council need to consider requests like this. And I think now, at least personally, having gone through it a couple times, I understand that world a lot better, and how we may redesign not only our application requirements, but the process along the way to ensure that these get the vetting that they need. So that's really kind of brings us to today. There hasn't been anything further planning zoning related. I wanted to touch on a couple items that are going to be coming up here in the next month. Because we actually have some projects coming along to the Planning Commission, so that's good. I love policy discussions, but it's also nice to kind of dig in on some development projects. We have a proposal it's not really redevelop, it's to renovate the former Collegeville Bookstore. It's at 321 East Grand River. Right now it's empty, or it's sitting vacant. It's been purchased by a gentleman named Peter Karate. He owns two restaurants, one in Milford, one in Howell. He's looking to develop it into Karate's Pizzeria, and it's basically a restaurant. So right now the building is one story, and they will be adding a story. So it'll be food, alcohol. So they'll be coming for a special use permit to the Planning Commission, to the City Council, with bocce courts on the second floor and an open air patio on the second floor, and some ground level street seating. So it's very interesting. That'll be heading your way here on May 11th for a public hearing. And just as an aside, well, I'll come back to that. So on May 25th, there will be a public hearing for the redevelopment of the Hall of Fame Cafe site at 1601 West Lake Lansing Road. They're on the south side of West Lake Lansing Road, right by US 27, or 127. So right now there's the Spartan Hall of Fame Cafe on that site. It would be that building would be raised, and they would develop two buildings, an office building, like a medical office building, and a restaurant with a drive-through window. That's what's proposed. So the public hearing will be on May 25. We also have what will be an administrative site plan consideration to renovate the Coolidge Court shopping center on the other side so at the southeast corner of Coolidge and Lake Lansing Road. It's a shopping center that I'm not sure when it was, maybe 70s or 80s when it was constructed, that they'll be doing essentially a facelift to that site. So that you won't see that, but I will send it along as an FYI. So we don't have a public hearing. Will fall into the administrative review category of our site plan process. So also, I just wanted to note certainly for the members here and for anyone that's watching us at home or around the world, we do post the applications for these projects, and actually the two of the three that I just mentioned are online right now at cityofeastlansing.com/current applications. So you'll see the renderings for the pizzeria, you'll see the site plan for the redevelopment of the Hall of Fame Cafe site. We try to get those up ahead of the public hearing so that everyone has access to the materials. Also, I'd like to, if you don't mind, Commissioner Wolf asked me earlier today for an update on 2040 Merritt Road. Is this appropriate time for that?
Absolutely.
Okay, so I'll give you just a brief update. And it was helpful because I had to update myself on kind of where we were at. A lot of these projects, you see them and they come and go, and some last longer than others.
For what it's worth, when I first read the memo, I was copied on the memo, I was thinking you were talking about the Pleasantries? It was because one of them is there's a marijuana dispensary, and I was thinking, but that's already done now. But no, you're talking about the one that's further north, and right.
Includes the hotel.
So just by way of clarification, so everyone's on the same page that I wasn't on, yeah.
Okay, so I'll just give a brief background. I think this is helpful for me, and so people know what I'm talking about too. So in 2019, Council granted special use permit and site plan approval for the redevelopment of what at one point was City of East Lansing Public Works home. So it was to construct 3 new buildings, 7,000 square foot medical marijuana provisioning center, a 4-story, 107-room hotel, and almost 9,000 square foot retail strip center with a drive-through window. So they were both approved. They were good. That happened in 2019. They were good for 1 year. They got 2 6-month extensions from the Planning Commission, and that all culminated in August 13th, 2021, when their approvals were close to being invalidated. So at the time there was, and I think I've been over this with this group, and this discussion happened at City Council at the time. There's a disagreement basically between our staff and the applicant. So they dropped the building materials off pretty last minute in the process, and we didn't have a lot of time to review them. So we did not issue the building permit at that time. Instead, we went through a process with City Council to do a letter agreement with the applicant. And so in November, City Council approved this letter agreement. It did a couple things. I want to walk you through it. I don't remember the level of detail we talked about, but really what it was intended to do was kind of settle the issue on both sides and make a path forward and avoid any other conversations outside of city buildings. So the letter agreement established a phasing plan, and that was something that was missing from the original project, and it established submittal dates for each phase of the project. So right now, the provisioning center's phase 1, we committed to approving the building permit, certainly if it meets the city ordinances for phase 1. There's no timeline on phase 1 for that right now, outside of the building permit, which I'll come back to. The multiple tenant shopping center would be phase 2, and they have to have, per this agreement, a building permit submitted to the city on or before September 1 of this year. If that does not happen, that invalidates, that special use permit approval is invalidated, they have to come back. And then the hotel, so assuming that happens, the phase 2 happens, and the building permit's submitted, phase 3 would be this hotel, and the building permit must be submitted on or before March 1, 2024. So it's staged. So if phase 2 gets in, then phase 3 is also on a shot clock. What this does, it allows them to move ahead with the construction of the provisioning center. It also gives, I think, everyone involved a timeline and some expectations as to how this project will unveil. And if it doesn't, allows for some freedom to move to in other ways. So there was a building permit that was submitted for the provisioning center. That was in January of 21. So when we got to August of that year, when it was due to expire, like I mentioned, we went through this letter agreement. Since that time, there have been some changes some minor changes to the plan. We noticed that a sidewalk was missing on the west side of Park Lake Road that was required. So they're adding that to the plan. That led to some issues related to that needed drain commissioner approval and Ingham County Road Department approval. So they have been working with both of those groups on that. We also wanted some clarity on the public art and to ensure that that was scheduled for phase 1 and that their plans all showed that it was in phase 1. And there was some paving around that. So we wanted to make sure all that stuff got nailed down in phase 1, because if phase 2 and phase 3 don't happen, I think the most important thing is to have obviously the development and the utility work and everything done, but also to have this public art that was a part of the approval. So we heard today that the county drain office has signed off. The road department is still pending. They have some work to do with them. They're reviewing the plans, but we're expecting that could be done in the coming weeks. So they do have an active building permit with us. There have been obviously some delays and some challenges along the way. I expect that those will be resolved here soon, and we may see the building permit get approved and dirt in the ground this spring. So, anyone have any questions about any of the council updates, or any of the coming projects, or anything about Merritt Road at this time?
Any questions for Mr. Menzer? Commissioner Wolf?
You mentioned the 532 Ann Street, and you said you were going to come back to that, I think.
Yeah, that's what led to the discussion on the moratorium. So
okay.
it was denied, and that led to a lot of questions. So there were some neighbors in the room. They had a lot of questions, or they had concerns about the Ann Street because it's adjacent to, or it's part of the Bailey neighborhood. It's just a bit south. You know, I'm not from the area, so I don't know the nomenclature and how it considers what where, but it's very close to the Bailey neighborhood or part of it. And there were some concerns about it, the closeness to it and the impacts to the neighborhood. As those concerns were relayed to council, there were considerations about do we need to take a step back here? What I think has happened is that when we had the team from MSU here, I think they were able to explain the process and understand, or at least relay, and I'm of the same belief, we don't have a pipeline of these fraternity projects coming along right now. So this seemed like a good time and a break. And as you know, no project comes along quickly. We have notices and public hearings and everything, there's a process. So this seemed like an ideal time that maybe instead of a moratorium, we could look at these text changes and be prepared for the next time one of these requests is made. The MSU reps relayed to us that they're not working with anyone currently that is looking for a space. So outside of the resolution of 404 East Michigan, I don't see any of these permits coming along, certainly in the next couple months. So that should give us time to take a step back, look at the ordinance, and see where that goes.
It seems somewhat significant to me that at least one and maybe a couple of council members were particularly concerned about 532 Ann Street because the building was never designed for a fraternity, and they were uncomfortable with the way it was being semi-reconfigured into something that didn't really look as though it would be ideal for a fraternity.
That was my takeaway as well. It was it's a home with apartments inside, with rooms inside. They're not separate units; they're rooms. And in I think there's 15. Does that remember right? I think there are 15 rooms in this house. And if you just walk by it, to me it looks like a house. So there are concerns about the amount of space that were there. So should this chapter have their social gatherings, which they are saying that they will have because this is their official university recognized chapter house, that this home would not be ideal to accommodate both the number of people and the potential vehicles for people that live there or people that may be attending meetings at the site.
Any other questions for Mr. Menzer? Did you want to introduce our new staff member?
I was going to wait until we get to the
That's fine,
presentation,
yeah.
if that's okay?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay, because she has a large role in that
Yep,
coming up
that's
here.
all good, yep. And note that we're joined by Commissioner Hendricks about 10 minutes ago, so let's call it 10 after. Absolutely, welcome. Item 4, Commissioner announcements. No, all right. And then on to item 5, communications from citizens. Now is the time of our meeting where we invite members of the public to come forward and make a comment on any item that's on our agenda or items that are not on our agenda but are worthy of or in need of Planning Commission attention. Is there anybody present? Ms. Cannon, you're the only one that's here. Please come forward.
Good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Janelle Cannon, and I currently sit on the Housing Commission, but I'm not speaking for the Housing Commission. I'm just speaking as one of the people delighted to be a resident here of East Lansing. And this is a very exciting time for people who are interested in civic issues here in the city of East Lansing. Your discussion around the Northern Tier development and the Evergreen property, and now potentially the Parcel C. I know that is reverting back to the city, and some may have been disappointed by that, but what that means is there's more flexibility for people to dream and plan about what we really want to see on those properties. And I thought this might be a good time to bring up the Age-Friendly Community report and its adoption by the city, and Darcy can probably tell us when that was. I don't remember the year. But one of the features of that report that the city agreed to was to establish a dream team of interested persons, architects, planners, staff, seniors, and I'm hoping that we find a way to engage the youth of our community. And I even mean children, because if we want to stop this flow of our children and youth from leaving the community, we educate them here and then they leave, they go away. let's get their take on what would you like to live in? If you had a chance to plan a village or a community, what would it look like? And if your grandma or grandpa could live there, what would that look like? What kinds of things would you like to see them have so that they could remain close to you and in the community and not be banished somewhere to the assisted living, wherever that is? You know, in our culture, we tend to segregate our older citizens to some sort of defined group living arrangement that's very large and impersonal, and you become part of the furniture. And if we want our youth to start to embrace getting older, to understand that getting old is a gift, not everybody gets it. I want us to be able to ask them, what will the world look like when you get to be 80? Because that's the fastest growing demographic in our country right now. People age 80 and over. And how can we still be a part of the community and valued as an elder in our communities where we can contribute and add to the fullness of life? So as we have opportunities to plan on what goes in those properties, ways of living, whether we increase the density and use new building materials like engineered wood or steel-clad outsides of the houses. There's all kinds of new construction materials that I'm sure Chairman Bowman knows all about, so that we can find ways to build affordable residences. I don't think building costs of the way we've been doing things are going to come down. I think this is the new normal, where it's very, very expensive to build a new building. So that's my pitch. How can we work together and dream up neighborhoods and communities that we want our kids to say, yeah, when I get to be 65, I want to live there. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just put it as if there's anybody else that wishes to address the commission, now would be the time. Okay, then we'll, and written communication would be included in our packet, but I don't believe we've received anything from citizens regarding any other issues.
We do? We do have callers, Dan.
Oh, I didn't, no, thanks. Again, keeping me honest.
One
If-
caller in the queue.
Please be so kind as to invite that individual to join us. Thank you.
The caller with the last three numbers of their phone, 534, you are allowed to speak.
Hello?
Hello.
Hi, this is Amy Hill at 685 Detail. I look forward to tonight's conversation or presentations having to do with the master plan and the northern tier. And my comments have to do specifically with that. I'm wondering, there was talk at previous planning meetings about having either a subgroup of the planning commission or a group of stakeholders, if you will. And I was very concerned that the public would be able to attend that. I don't sit on a commission. I'm not a council member. I'm not a member of staff. I'm not I'm not a developer, nothing like that, but I'm a citizen of the northern tier. And I would like to be able to sit in on meetings that are ongoing, not waiting until the very end to be able to provide my input and to hear what's been going on. So I guess my first point is, please, I would very much appreciate having, if there are discussions that go on like that, having them be so that the public can attend. And not that we necessarily need to be a part of any team or anything like that, but to provide some kind of comment should we feel it's appropriate. The second item would be with the use of the property there in the northern tier. There seems to be a lot of conversation about mixed-use housing, and certainly that sort of format or structure can be very effective in some places. However, I'm not so confident that north of Lake Lansing Road or even north of Saginaw is really where it's proven to be effective. When we look at the Beaumont, which is Coleman Road, on the south side of Coleman Road between Coolidge and Chandler, it was mandated that they put up mixed-use housing. They went several years without being able to get anyone to occupy the retail spaces, and then went back to City Council after several years and asked for permission to convert those into apartments, which after spending another $400,000, they were able to do that. I think if you'll go around to other areas of mixed-use housing around here, you find there just isn't a huge demand for, and those businesses that are in there certainly aren't making enormous amount of profits in them. When in an environment like that, there just isn't the clientele surrounding the area to be able to sustain it for long periods of time. So I ask that while the mixed-use housing can be beneficial in some areas, I would ask that we be cautious about pushing that trendy type of structure because it is trendy, and make sure that we're using good common sense as we go forward in that. Third, when the housing study was done, I think it's called Land Use USA, made a comment, Sharon, I don't remember her last name, made a comment that students would even rather be in single-family houses than they would in apartments. Yet it seems to be that we keep building these large apartment structures, and I'm curious, is there any reason why we couldn't take some of that northern tier area, and I will say specifically between State, Coolidge, and Coleman, is there any reason that couldn't be converted to residential? Because there is a lot of funding that comes in when you have neighborhoods rather than a single building with typically rentals are transient by nature. You're talking about every 3 years, I think, on average, that nationally a renter moves. But when you look at the taxable value, Hawknest, for example, which is where I'm from, in 2021, the taxable value for our community was $41.8 million. Eagle Eye, it was $9 million, and Villas of Stratford, $0.6 million. I don't have the numbers for Falcon Point, I'm afraid. But when we look at neighborhoods, and that doesn't even include any income taxes, we're currently being charged the income taxes. That doesn't include any revenue that the city would have from a neighborhood community. Yes, in a business you can get certain amounts of people, employees, you're going to get that. But when you're talking neighborhood, I think we're really missing the boat if we don't at least consider it and have that conversation. And those are my comments. Thank you.
Caller, I'm afraid when you came on, if you said your name, I didn't hear it.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, I did. It's Ann Hill, A-N-N-H-I-L, 665.
Okay, thanks, Ann. Ms. Hill, thanks. Appreciate your comments. Is that the end of our queue then?
That is
All right,
all the
thank you.
colors in the queue.
And then that will be the end of communications from citizens. We have no public hearings this evening, and so our first item, our only item of old business, item 7.1, Northern Tier, the future land use map. Mr. Menzer? Or,
I'll start, yeah.
okay.
So, good evening. I guess I want to address Ms. Hill's comment very briefly that the only work that's taken place on this has been on this particular topic so far has been in this room or with just our planning team. It hasn't gotten very far yet. So, but your point is certainly valid, that we do need to include as many people as possible, and that is a part of the plan. And I will touch on that a little bit, because really this is still, we're still at the very preliminary stages of kind of where this could go. So, but point, definitely your voice is heard, and that's important. So tonight I really wanted to talk about two things, and I feel like I may have not gotten it straight at previous meetings, and I want to have the opportunity to correct it if I didn't. That really what we're doing tonight, or what I'm hoping that we can get out of tonight in the short term, is answering a request from City Council that maybe I didn't explain clearly, or maybe I didn't understand clearly, which is certainly the case, on two items. Really, whether or not the future land use map should be amended in a future update to the 2018 master plan to designate parcels in the northern tier area, and we'll talk more about what that is, of the city for residential land uses, and also, so for residential land uses, period. So we're looking some clarity on that, and really just trying to transmit to council just really a binary yes or no, this is something we'd like to explore. So the rest of that conversation is to be had and will not happen tonight, or is not slated tonight. At the end of our presentation, I'm going to at least kind of present what my vision is, and certainly I don't expect it to be your vision, but I figure sometimes it's easier to start with something, and we can amend it from there and go whatever direction that you choose to. But I at least wanted to start with something to talk about. So we'll talk about that at the end of the presentation. Also, we'd like to transmit to council what they're asking for, and I know that I did not ask this correctly to previous meeting. They are looking for direction on whether or not residential units, and I'm being very vague purposely, should be a component of the future vision for the 27-acre city-owned parcel there at West Road and Coleman Road. So the city, for those of you that don't know, there's a 27-acre parcel the city came into owning. It's at the southwest corner of West and Coleman. It's currently most undeveloped, outside of a couple of billboards and some consumers' energy easements. So they're looking for some direction on that, and what that will provide is how they market the property, the kind of who they talk to. So the real estate, really how the direction we give to the real estate company that we hired, we being the city, to market this property. So those are the two things that I'm hoping that can come out of this meeting tonight. To get you there, what I'm hoping is to look a little bit at the past. So as I'll introduce Taylor in 1 second, but there's been a lot of work that's happened in the northern tier. A lot of it I certainly was not aware of. So we are not the first or the second or even the fifth group to take a look at the northern tier and how it might be used. But we're hoping that this kind of history will help inform the discussion on kind of how we got to today, and then maybe knowing some of that, where do we go from there? So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Taylor Van Winkle. Taylor's our new associate planner. She's currently finishing up a master's degree in urban and regional planning at Michigan State. She's in the final throes of being done with school. I don't even know if she realizes what that means yet. So Taylor's been working part-time with our team for the last couple months, and she'll start full-time following graduation and a trip overseas, and we're happy to have her, and she's done a great job with the city. And so Taylor's going to walk you through a presentation that, for those at home, was posted to the city website later today, later this afternoon, but it is on the page where our agenda is located, right, Rebecca? Yes. Okay, so it's on, if you're at home watching this meeting, you'll see that this presentation, if you want to follow along, is posted to the city website, or if you're in the room here, it's going to be on the screen also. Some of you maybe will pull it up on laptops. I have some paper copies if anyone's interested. Just give me a hands up and I'll bring you around one here in a second. So Taylor and I are going to tag team this presentation. She's going to walk you through the history and kind of get you to the 2018 master plan, and then I'll take over and talk about a lot of different kind of things. So thank you, Taylor.
Thanks, Peter. So like you said, I'm Taylor Van Winkle. I'm the new associate planner I'd like to take this moment to express how excited I am to be working in the city and with city staff, and also looking forward to working with you guys. Oh, sorry, you're moving around back there. Okay. So I'm new here, as Peter mentioned, right? And so this was a great opportunity for me to learn more about the city and learn about the Northern Tier particularly, but digging into the history of what's been done and planning efforts. So this information that we'll be presenting today is primarily sourced from archival planning documents and from the city archives. So we kind of dug back into the past a bit to see what's been done. So here's a timeline of documents we'll be covering today. The planning efforts in the Northern Tier stretch back really far. We'll be beginning in the 1970s. And the precise parameters of what defines the Northern Tier have changed over time as the city has expanded northward. So you'll see in the maps that I present how that's changed over time. So here we have a map showing the expansion of East Lansing over time. The oldest parts of the city, as everybody who lives here knows, is closest to MSU, right, the southern part of the city, and it gets younger as it gets farther north. So most of the area we consider today to be the Northern Tier, north of Lake Lansing Road, was acquired in the late 1990s and the early 2000s. So that's what that map shows there. So we're going to begin with one of the first studies performed in the northern portion of the city, which was the Northwest Tier Land Use Study in 1977. So the city was faced with a rezoning request for the potential development of a regional mall to be developed in 1980. That's where Meyer is now, and it didn't go through with it didn't become a regional mall, it just became Meyer. So the city wanted to examine the potential development strategies for the area because it was at that point undeveloped. So at the time, the Northwest Tier was considered north of Saginaw, west of Abbott, east of US 127, and south of the Ingham-Clinton County line. And the Northwest Tier was primarily residential, with very few commercial developments and many undeveloped parcels. The study proposed several future growth strategies, and the City Council elected to prioritize continued gradual residential growth, so like a slow residential growth in the area. And this is what these maps show. They're black and white, they're pretty old, but that's what they show overall. And then that goes into the 1984 land use plan, which was the first land use plan for the Northwest Tier specifically. And that was adopted in 1984. This plan, while discussing other kinds of zoning, was unique in that it introduced a new zoning district known as Neighborhood Service Activity Center, which allowed for a limited range of retail sales in residential areas for the purposes of convenience. And the plan prioritized retail commercial areas, mixed residential development near existing shops and retail, and infrastructure improvements into the area. Because it was undeveloped, there was a lot of infrastructure expansion that needed to happen at the time. And then this plan was updated in 1993 into the Northern Tier plan, and that is where we get the term today, the Northern Tier. So together, combined, those plans guided the development of significant projects such as Meyer and Kroger, Coolidge Court, which was mentioned earlier, the new single-family neighborhoods at the time, Abbott, Parkside, Harrison Meadows, and then the East Lansing Soccer Complex, Softball Complex, Aquatic Center, and several parks. And then also a significant portion of the Northern Tier Trail was composed during that time, was constructed. Could you go to the next slide? Oh, you did? Great, thank you. So following the Public Act 425 agreement in 2002 with DeWitt Township, the city added 1,200 acres to the northern portion of the city, north of Lake Lansing Road. So this area is what commonly now is considered the Northern Tier, and the city needed a new future land use plan at that point because the land was added and it wasn't accounted for in previous plans. So as a result, they created a future land use map, which was later adopted in 2002, and they amended the comprehensive plan with that update. And the amendment called for mixed land uses, appropriate development densities, and sustainable growth. And among the proposed land use changes in the plan was a designation for commercial neighborhood services, which is an adaptation of that earlier neighborhood activity center district, which promoted small commercial entities which would serve local needs, such as cafes or bakeries, really close to residential areas. So beyond zoning for those kind of commercial developments, the 2002 plan also included a lot of primary development for residential areas, and then much of the residential areas in the northern tier were designated for single-family use at that point. In 2006, the city kind of adopted the big picture comprehensive plan, and this includes citywide goals for infill development, increased residential densities, mixed use, and increased community self-sufficiency and quality of life in particular. So the plan promoted mixed use and neighborhood service districts as well to provide those basic conveniences to residents, but outside of major streets. So before they were primarily along major corridors that were busy, but in 2006 they wanted to meet needs on a smaller scale. And then the western portion of the northern tier was allocated primarily for offices and mixed use, which can be seen in this zoning map. And then following, in 2008, following the Great Recession, at that point there were some challenges to planning. Mixed-use development, which was what was called for at the time for the Northern Tier, did not appear to be as viable to developers. So as a result, the Northern Tier Development Strategy Review was created and published by the city to reevaluate the Northern Tier's development needs. So here's some recommendations from that review. It proposed a set of short-term and long-term recommendations to balance local needs with developing needs, and it recommended an update to the Northern Tier plan that largely accommodated more commercial development, not entirely commercial development, but just adding more than there was, mixed-use nodes, and then they also recommended that they facilitate the development of form-based code in the area. In 2018, the City Council adopted the Bigger Picture Master Plan, and this, in addition to regular zoning for commercial and residential areas, they promoted conservation, easements, and expanding the Northern Tier Trail as priorities in the big plan for the Northern Tier. Nearly half of the very most Northern Tier area is the sod farm, whose protection was called for against development pressures, and that was secured in 2021. So the sod farm is the eastern portion of that gray area, and it's protected against development pressures. And then other than those environmental protections and infrastructure expansions that are accommodated for in the plan, the area was primarily slated for economic development in the form of office, light industrial, and financial developments. And this can be seen primarily in that middle blue color, not that dark blue of the sod farm and not the light blue of the commercial on the south portion of the area, but the western portion, that's a royal blue. And so this area west of Coolidge in the Northern Tier was mainly designated Commercial 3, which is oriented towards office and business development. It also designates a Northern Tier financial district in that area, which eases the opening and expansion of banking institutions and insurance companies. If you cast your mind to where that is, that's where MSU FCU is headquarters, as well as a few other institutions in that area. However, primarily that area is undeveloped as of yet. And that brings us to today, and Peter's going to talk about that later, and I'll pass the rest of the presentation off to Peter. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Taylor. I don't know. So one thing I wanted to note is we do have images of those of the maps. So we went through the maps quickly. I know they're hard to read on the screen, and then maybe probably on your screens too. They're not easy to read, just in general. That we have old copies, so if, we can share those with you following the meeting. We may end up actually probably creating a website and posting them to it, but we can send them out before that if you want to zoom in. It's a lot easier to see up close, and so you can zoom in. So thanks, Taylor. I guess we could hold all the questions till the end, unless you want to do questions on the history stuff now. Okay, we'll just barrel ahead for now.
Yep.
Okay, well, thank you. What I was hoping to touch on now was, so Taylor got us really to today, and we're all pretty familiar with the current designations in this area, and part of it has built out. So if you take a look at the, we're on the, do you mind paging back to the future land use map? Thanks. So if you take a look at the blue, a lot of the areas that are kind of unspoken for, I guess, this is what Taylor alluded to, are the blue sites. So outside of the MSU FCU development up there in the northwest tier, or the northern west corner, we've got the two MSU parcels, and we have the Mercantile Bank site. Really the rest of what was envisioned as that Coolidge office park is undeveloped. There are some properties along along west of West Road that are undeveloped. There are some that are, and that's in the, down there is where the hotel is going. The hotel at 3225, the extended stay hotel that came through in the fall last year. And then you see the big city parcel, and right next to the word west there. Not that you can see that, but hopefully you can see it on your screen. So then eliminate the sod farm, which is a big chunk of the northern tier. Then you really can take kind of the green off of this map because it's either wetlands or, in this case, one case, a golf course. We have a few established neighborhoods. So there's only so many sites that are kind of left as being potentially available for development, but of course under private ownership, and certainly some have been kind of called for already, whether they have an existing approval for something or they were slated for something in the past. So we'll get into that, but I just want to kind of identify where some of the potential opportunities are in this area and where we are now. The blue, sorry, I've got a lot of windows going here. So I find one thing. So C3 does not call for any kind of residential. And in fact, not many of the current designations call for that, which is one of the reasons we're looking at this area. So I'm going to just move ahead. Over the last month or so, we've been looking at updating the existing land use map. And this map will surely change in terms of color and categories, but we're trying to get an idea now of what's in the area. So about 11% is commercial or office space, and this is of total land area. 13% residential, 11% is park or green space, and 23% is undeveloped or vacant. And right, and the undeveloped excludes the sod farm. Just take that off the table because it's not on the table at all. So that's just off, not including any of those figures. So we'd like to continue to refine this existing land use map because that'll be part of a potential future master plan update. Just wanted to give you an idea of what's there now. Next, please.
So the sod farm, there's about 40% missing in the total on the left. The sod
Correct.
farm is the rest of that?
Yeah. Okay, and this is just looking at zoning, current zoning. So that whole area along the west of Coolidge is all zoned B4, and that currently does not allow any kind of residential either. And actually, I have a future slide. We'll talk more about that. So we want to talk about some of the issues, and I know this group is, I know that you're probably already well tuned into this, but I wanted to at least kind of touch on some of the challenges we're facing, because really this effort is through a housing perspective. That a lot of this, the impetus for the work that we've done in the last couple of months is all focused on the target market analysis. So what came out of that was this near-term housing action plan. And part of that, one of the goals was to review the northern tier for potential opportunities to address some of the housing issues. So what are the issues that we're looking at? I don't think they're that much different than what the rest of the country is looking at. So really it's a deficit in the literal physical number of homes. So the production of housing has gone down significantly over the years. There's been a long-term decline in single-family homes. There's an actual shortage that's increasing every year nationally of homes. And you see that play out in a lot of different ways all over the country. It's just not about the number, though. It's also about type of housing. There's a lack of entry-level starter homes. And I think that's, as a person that lives outside the city now, and I've dipped my toe in the real estate market, maybe I'm not a starter home, but there are just not a lot of opportunities, certainly in this area. And you can see it's dropped significantly in the marketplace from 1980 down to 2019. So millennials are the largest demographic, and they're all trying to buy first-time homes, and the market isn't there for that, or the stock is not available for that. There's also an issue related to affordability. So housing prices rose just from 2019 to 2020 to 12% nationally. I saw a figure today that had over 20%, and that keeps going up, and projections have it keep going up. or note that it could continue to keep going up. And actually, a member in our audience, I've certainly also seen things that this is not necessarily just an influx, but this might be a straight line versus a curve. Housing demand is outpacing supply. I think that's obvious. And then we have this missing middle, and this is related to the types of housing. We don't have the homes available for the people that want to live here in the city. And speaking just specifically to the city, it's also a nationwide problem. But we just don't have that available for the middle class, lower class, entry level. I don't mean to ascribe any kind of negativity with the lower class, it's just economic status. That we just don't have homes for that. And as we'll get into, we don't have homes for the aging population, the types of homes that they want to live in. So missing middle could include townhomes, smaller single-family homes, non-student oriented apartments. The caller earlier had a comment about something that Ms. Woods said from Land USA. She did the target market analysis. What we had seen, I have a slide on it in a second, was actually that the students prefer attached units, not single-family units. We'll touch on that in a second. So the number of new homes, this is just a slide from the Census Bureau. The number of new homes constructed below 1,400 feet has dramatically dropped over the years, from it looks like a peak in the mid-70s down to an all-time low in the 2014, and we're still pretty much there. It just has not recovered. There's a lot of factors that we don't even need to get into, but the facts are they haven't changed. So as hinted at earlier, we obviously have an aging population. By 2030, an estimated 1 in 5 Americans will be 65 and older. Other issues that we're experiencing that I think complicate everything too, but also have led to why we're kind of embarking on this mission, and specifically in the Northern Tier, is I think the pandemic has changed life and the economy in ways that we don't even probably know yet, but certainly what we're seeing so far is a retraction of business space, office particularly, building new offices. Well, obviously people are working from home more. There's just more of a focus on smaller spaces and less drive and certainly less financing to fund the office projects or even new retail projects. And the viability and what that means to the viability, kind of the current designations in the future land use map. And I think specifically to that business office park that's around the MSU space, but also other spaces in Northern Tier. So properties have not developed as envisioned. It may not, given the pandemic and how things have changed. And do we want to get ahead of that, or at least move forward kind of eyes wide open as to this is a factor? Certainly current future land use map designations do not address housing. A lot of the designations now do not call for housing at all. So that big blue block of commercial doesn't call for housing, and it wouldn't lead to any sort of rezoning that would add housing. That doesn't mean things can't change, and that's kind of what we're talking about right now. And certainly there's opportunities to add housing or even redevelopment in other parts of the city are few and far between. The city is comprised of a lot of existing neighborhoods, in many cases historic neighborhoods. I see those persisting for many years, and rightfully so. The student dollar is strong in the city. It is hard to, for private property that's been developed in one way, let's just say as an apartment building, the chances of that redeveloping into something that's going to address the needs that have been identified in our housing study and the types of housing that we want are probably rarer than we may hope. So what I'm trying to say is just that the opportunities to address these things, we may not be able to find them in kind of the current infrastructure or the current built environment. Redevelopment may not be in the cards for a lot of these properties. So all right, we'll get to that. I may have gone out of order a little bit, but this slide shows just the population changes over the years. Much larger percentage of those 65 and older at this point. So we have two documents that have kind of steered this most recent effort. The residential target market analysis that happened last fall and talked about unmet demand and potential for new build housing. in the city, and particularly in the northern area, in the northern, what they call the northern sub-area in the study. So it has an inventory of available houses, and it notes that there's an inventory of available housing at any given time is less than 150, and that was for a specific time period. And that may be different now given the changes due to the pandemic. When prior to the Great Recession, that number was over 250. So the availability of houses at any given time is significantly lower. The average number of days on the market has shrunk from 90 days to 60 days, and I think in probably just the street level view, it could be even far less than that. Average house selling is gone dramatically up, and in the figure at the time, it was 150 up to 200,000. So there was a housing strategic plan that was right on the heels of the target market analysis, and that talked about a couple different things, but it recommended new construction and rehabilitation of condos and apartment complexes, and multifamily housing types. Easier said than done, but the rehabilitation portion, but new construction was a recommendation. And then areas of the city to be rezoned according to market needs and demands for new housing. So at the time, they talked specifically about that 27-acre lot that the city owns, that it might be better suited for, instead of the C3 designation in the master plan, to something like a planned unit development, mixed use kind of situation. And I understand the callers' concerns earlier about mixed use, but this is just the idea that maybe something different than office space. And that might include residential. It could include higher density residential, or could include any type of that. Okay, so also the residential analysis looked at the sub area in terms of the availability, so the market potential. So for new buildings, so it's saying at the time it was saying that there were at any given when the study there was 120. Potential for 120 new homes, and potential for 1,000 renters in that sub area, and that those folks would occupy detached unit 380, like of that number, they would occupy detached units and attached units with the owners. So for owners, people that want to own homes, want to own detached units, and this is all done through the credit study. So they looked at credit profiles and they match up with how people spend their money with how they would want to live. So the owners want to live in detached, and the renters want to live in attached housing. So that kind of brings us to the city property. So I think you've all seen this, but the situation here is that it's along the extended Coleman Road to the north, and it's at the southwest corner of West and Coleman. So this is something, there's nothing, like I said earlier, there's two billboards along the highway, and we have some energy easements along the side. There are some wetlands in the northwest corner of the site. So right now, the city is undertaking an effort to market this property and is looking for some direction on what kind of uses might be in the future and whether or not to include residential. So there's a couple questions I wanted to focus on to start with, and then I have one more slide that talks about potential next steps. So the primary question here tonight, and this is to transmit to City Council on behalf of the Planning Commission, is should the future land use map be amended in a future update to designate parcels in the northern tier area of the city for residential land use? So really I'm boiling that down to, is residential appropriate or desired in this area? And then also this question about Coleman Road, and should residential units, very broadly, be included in the future vision of that site? How that manifests, I don't have an answer for today, but that's kind of the path that we would go down in direct response to our caller from earlier. That path would include citizen engagement with the property owners that are out there, and certainly we're not making any decisions tonight about that. So before I go into the next slide that talks about kind of next steps, do you have any questions that would help kind of frame this question right now, or anything that you've heard, questions about anything you've heard yet tonight?
Are you looking for like our opinion on this information this evening?
Yeah.
Okay.
It really just, and I'm trying to frame them in a binary way, just a yes or no. And that was what I was hoping to transmit. And that'll give council some direction on where they go. And then my last slide is going to talk about, okay, knowing this, now what?
Okay. Do you want that right now, or do you want to move on to your second set of questions, or do you want to discuss this right now?
Well, it's really what I'm open to the best way to doing it. My next slide is a preview. Is really just like if we do want to consider residential, some considerations on how it might go, and I can go right into that.
Sure.
Okay, so
Well, I guess I'll leave that to the group to
Okay.
decide whether they want to answer. I will say that just by way of a question leading into, because you're suggesting that ultimately the city's going to market this to somebody, and whether that marketing is going to be commercial based or residential based is going to be determined by some of the input that you get from this group and presumably others.
correct.
Is there not some inquiries heading in the other direction, sort of knowing that this parcel is potentially available, that somebody has approached the city or?
There definitely have been, yeah. So the city right now, the property is being marketed as available.
Okay.
There hasn't been any specific direction given to the real estate company that's marketing it, or anybody that we've really talked to. And there have been people that have approached the city about a project there.
Okay.
Mostly I don't know the answer, whether or not they were specific offers or whether they were conversations that took place with the real estate agent.
Sure.
But I can tell you that not less, more than one of them have been related specifically to like higher density student oriented housing. And if that is probably not the direction that the city is interested in going, we want to make the most of the parcel and have it address a lot of the needs, specifically in the housing study that came out of this. Is there a way to tackle this parcel and have it address some of these needs? I'm not saying it could address all of the needs, but are there opportunities there to check some boxes in the way that this property develops and potentially set the tone for other projects in the area?
Commissioner Wagner.
Peter, I read in the news that a German auto industry company is considering East Lansing for a headquarters or development. Is that this land, or is that a different?
It's not that site.
Okay.
Yeah, it would be. Did they come to the council meeting? I didn't.
Existing building, isn't it? I saw it on the wire as well. I don't remember where.
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know
It
that.
came to the council meeting, or was on the agenda or something. I saw it also.
Yeah,
It's-
so there is a company that's looking. It's not this site. It's another site where there's a. I'd have to get the address.
It's the former Rocket Sports.
Yeah.
Gentilosi's
Right, correct.
property that we split or approved a split for not too long ago.
I think it was last year, or the year before. So that's all. It is in the northern tier, but it's south of where we're talking about right now.
Commissioner Hall.
There are other vacant properties up in this area other than the city-owned property. Presumably they're in private hands and are possibly available for development, sale by their owners. Are we to be considering possible rezoning of those? I mean, normally, I'm not sure if the city would go ahead and rezone a property under private ownership without a request from the owners.
Do you mind going to the next one? That's what I was going to touch on.
Oh.
If the planning commission and council ultimately decide to go down this road, there may be some opportunities to engage with those parties. So there are a couple, and it's really only a couple that own quite a bit of land in the northern tier. And engage with them. Kind of the city establishes its vision for those sites. As we do so, we talk to the property owners about what did they have in mind, and are there ways that they could address, that they could match. Well, ultimately they would have to, align their vision with the city's vision, and then potentially go down the road of rezoning some properties preemptively with property owner. The property would have to be a part of it, but to potentially, and I want to phrase this for anybody that might listen to me tonight or at a future meeting. This is a very broad very early conversation about this. I'm not interested in kind of claiming other people's properties or rezoning anyone's property without their complete consent and inclusion. And that's both to the residents in the area and to the owners that are out there today. So this is really kind of at this point, an exercise, but may lead to real life steps. One of those being, if we go down the road of updating the future land use map, and new designations are identified, working with the stakeholders and property owners in the area to potentially proactively rezone these properties to match what the city wants to see. And I don't know how aggressive of a strategy how that's played out in the past, but the idea would be to kind of follow on the heels of the future land use map and approach people about maybe actually implementing the plan to get them into a category that might be viable, that would address some of the needs that we've been talking about here tonight.
It just seems to me that almost anything that might make sense to us for the city-owned property would also make sense as a future land use for these other properties. We might want to see it more extensive than just on that 27 acres.
Yeah.
And, adding to that, you're also potentially dealing, this is a pretty big parcel, whereas if you're dealing with these other private owners, it might be something that's more viable and a smaller, I don't know, at a smaller scale, as opposed to something that's sort of committing the entire 27 acres. If there's some interest in actually rezoning it to something of an entirely different use for which it's currently made available, it's a fair point that sort of, if we're looking to, as the city, to change the proposed nature of the use of that large parcel, is there additional or related interest in a smaller parcel to do the same thing? I've said this in the past. It's it seems like it's easier to get 1,000 one-bedroom units or whatever, 50 one-bedroom units than to get one 50-bedroom unit, just because the potential for, I'll say, failure it's not insignificant, and that if one or two of the 50 one-bedroom units don't turn a profit, that's sort of on the individual small risk taker, as opposed to a very large unit or a large development. Sort of if that doesn't go well, I'm reminded of what happened at Chandler Crossings. I don't know exactly what the situation is there now, but that it seemed like the rents were going to be lower, and it was going to be a super easy bus ride to downtown, and they provided a lounge that the students could hang out in. And I don't know, truly, I don't know. I really don't know how successful that was, but my sense is that it didn't go as well as was hoped. Maybe it's doing better now.
We could look into that and come back with a report.
Right. Ultimately, I'm not really looking for a specific. I guess I'm concerned is that we're looking at the same sort of thing here. Is that there's a lovely piece of land and there's potential for building on it. I've not seen anything, and I know you're not charged with providing me with proof, but is residential appropriate or desired in the area? I've not seen anything that convinces me that there is, which is why I ask: if somebody's making inquiries about what could potentially, as a potential buyer of that property, if they presumably done the work that I have not, in order to determine whether or not there's a use that's going to be viable there, that's outside of what's currently permitted.
Yeah, I think that they have. I guess I'll speak for them. They obviously are seeing something in the site, and I think the target market analysis is telling us there is a market for residential in the area. Now, certainly to be determined what that means and how that manifests is to be determined. Sure. I think there are some prescriptive things in there about housing types, and there's a lot of homework to be done on that front. But generally, if maybe I'm naive and I'm thinking too big kind of coming into this, but the mayor told us to think big about the city parcel, and the idea of the whole northern tier is, if we're not going to get kind of what was thought about in 2018, and that was a perfectly valid thought at the time, and it may still be, but if there are opportunities to address some of these issues that we've identified over the last year as part of this housing study, and to potentially enact a vision and get the projects that the city wants to see rather than what's offered to us, and to be proactive about the entire area, albeit and kind of recognizing that there aren't that many opportunities, because a lot of the land is spoken for, but if we can engage on what's left and be influential and set the stage for what we want to see, I think there's an opportunity there. How that plays out, I mean, it's great to have a plan, and you think things are going to go this way, but my chart, like what I have been charged as a staffer, is to kind of figure this out and get some direction and think about not just the city parcel, but the whole area, and if we can find a designation that could work, and I want to talk a little bit about that, because if we were to go down the road to the master plan amendment, and Darcy actually later is going to talk about what that entails, the actual process, but part of that would certainly include the future land use map and existing designations, but are there new categories that we want to include? So would the current designations in the future land use map, do they fit a vision for what elected and appointed officials want to see in the area? Do we need to create new categories? How I see that playing out ultimately is resulting in a new draft future land use map. A big part of that is in community engagement. As the caller mentioned earlier, and as some of the property owners that I've talked to already, when they hear you're talking about their land, they want to talk to you as well. So they want to be a part of that, and they want to. When we talk about future or form-based code, you switch the dialogue and you talk about what what you want first, and that's kind of like you're dangling the lure out to developers to say, we want this. If you want to build this, this is the path of least resistance, is building what the city wants to see. And you're going to get a lot of support. You're going to have a faster process to do that, because it's kind of been pre-vetted. And that, to me, is you can do the same kind of thing with zoning districts. If you can craft the right, between the future land use map and the zoning district, if we can create the right designation, get the right kind of zoning that's going to identify the kind of projects we want to see, we can do the same kind of thing without necessarily doing a form-based code in the area. But it's the same philosophy, I think, is kind of setting the stage so that we get what we want. And I'm paraphrasing, but so that's how the process I could see playing out for the amendment of the plan. There are some other considerations about rezoning properties to prepare for projects. I mean, starting with the city-owned site at Coleman and West, but what's good for that site, as Commissioner Wolf mentioned, may also be applicable to other sites in the area. And then ultimately, potentially, creating a new zoning district that includes, and I say mixed use here, but it's kind of a placeholder for something else. So do our current districts, will the current zoning districts we've got get us there? It's a question. So right now, none of the residential districts allow for commercial uses. So if we were to apply some of our current districts, so like, for example, the master plan designations. Sorry. Like B1 allows for mixed use. These should be R, right? No, sorry, our business districts. B1 allows for mixed use, office with apartments above only. B2 allows for mixed use, multiple family, 4 or few bedrooms with commercial. And then B3 allows for mixed use, 3 or fewer bedrooms, or standalone multiple family with a special use permit. So the question is, do our current zoning districts kind of get us there? It's something we'll need to tackle in the future. But really what I'm putting on the table here is amending the master plan, taking a look at the designations, deciding if we need new ones in the master plan, creating a draft map, engaging with everybody involved, in also looking at our zoning districts and deciding, will those produce the projects that the city wants to see, and possibly amending those, creating a new district to apply specifically in this area. It's kind of all on the table, but I wanted to talk about that as being kind of the next step. So first, we're going through this decision whether or not we want, whether or not we want to go down those paths, and then we'll talk to city council, get some direction from city council, and then I think the real work starts on fleshing all of this out.
Commissioner Sullivan, Vice Chair.
Yeah, so I jotted down just several comments during your presentation. So I think the number one thing that stands out to me, of course, is the Coleman Road extension and how really that was a game changer for the site. And I think that opened up a lot of opportunities that did not exist there, and I think that's stating the obvious. But to your specific questions, number one, is residential desired in the northern tier? I mean, absolutely, I think so. I think that should be priority number one. It's kind of the chicken and the egg thing, right? The additional residential does bring some of the potential other components and the commercial uses and things like that are also desirable. But I think that the data you've presented and data I've seen elsewhere certainly suggests that more housing is needed, and in particular, kind of that starter home range. And I think the benefit of those types of homes, I think I jotted down like the 1,200 to 2,000 square foot range, is that those kind of target newer families in addition to families that potentially are downsizing because they're empty nesters. I think that there's a lot of different markets you could tap into there that would be beneficial. But I keep going back to kind of the concept that Commissioner Wolf laid out at one of the previous meetings, where we could have kind of a mixed use thing where there's multiple houses and perhaps a community center or a gym or even a diner. So I think that there's ways that we could get creative, but when I'm thinking about this specific site, I think residential probably is my number one option at the moment. I think it would take another strong possibility to steer me away from that thought, but I'm just not sure residential perhaps makes as much money as some of these other sites that would be put on that site, and that's worth noting. But I just want us to present this in a way that presents it as broad as possible, right? I want to just kind of see all of the options that are potentially viable for this site before we kind of settle on anything concrete. Like, I don't know, it's a difficult decision, right? Do we choose the zoning for the site first, or do we decide kind of the things that we would like to see there and look at proposals? And I don't know, it's tough for me to answer right now at this point. But I don't know, I'm encouraged by the discussions up to this point, but just the fact that there is Hawkness up there is the Coleman Road extension, there's a school there, so there are certainly some things that I think would fit in with having residential there. And I don't know if that's townhomes or individual family homes, but I'm interested to see what's put forth.
Any other comments? Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, I'm concerned about a couple of things. I am strongly in favor of getting more residential zoning up there. And I had mentioned the possibility of it being mixed with commercial, retail in particular. But I am really concerned about the failure of mixed use and retail up there. And we started trying that 20 years ago or so. And as the caller mentioned, we had the I forgot the name of it already, Gaslight Village. We also had there's another complex on Coleman Road on the south side that was built with commercial on the ground floor and came back and said they could not fill it. I can't remember the name of that one.
Beaumont.
Yes, the Beaumont, right. And then we had also designated the northeast corner of Coleman and Coolidge as I forgot what we call it, a local services area kind of for mixed retail and services, and that never went anywhere. And I don't really understand it. I mean, we have how many thousand, we have student apartments on both sides of Chandler Road up there and running down Coleman. We have the Beaumont, we have Hawk Nest, we have Falcon Point that has filled up since then, and yet it still doesn't seem to be able to support commercial retail and services. So that worries me. I'd like to see it be successful, but I don't know if it can be. The other thing is, when we look here at your description of what we would like to have, we're trying to help out with the housing crisis, affordable housing, starter housing. But if economics dictate that the profitable use of the land is to build more single-family homes that start at $500,000 or something like that. How do we, just by rezoning our one property and trying to direct its usage through our sale, we do have the control over that one, is that really going to have enough of an effect? So I hate to be the negative one here. Those seem like two obstacles to what we're talking about. But I would be all in favor of it. I sent that information around a couple months ago about the affordable housing, the actually income limited housing that they've managed to do in Ann Arbor and in Washtenaw County. And it would be really great if we could do something like that. But it just seems like it's going against the market.
I think the key there, as we talked about at the time, was that was subsidized by was it a 1 mil? I can't remember how much it was, but it seems to me that's a question that could potentially go back to one person, a part of a group that's supposed to be charged with land use, future land use or land use planning for the city. Are we committed to that as a potential possibility? As Commissioner Wolf has said, as you all know, the cost of construction is such that new development is not going to be occupied by low to moderate. Tom used a different term to refer to it today.
Attainable.
Attainable, that's it. Thank you, and I'm going to try to use that. I'll try to remember that. Yeah, I'm going to write it down. But that, and we're in a not a unique but an unusual or a sort of throughout the state situation where the reality is that students are nomadic, right? And as you say, have the capacity to afford the new fairly expensive buildings that you've marked it sort of non-student oriented. People can live where they're going to live. I know you know this. I'm not lecturing you, but it's something where it's kind of we've got that as just another reality that we have to deal with when building new. That, to my way of thinking, that the new building gets occupied by whoever can afford it, and the rest of everybody else that's sort of semi-nomadic, right, would sort of start to move to the newly vacant and the newly vacant, and eventually some new players, new residents get to participate because sort of that as the shells start to move, there's a vacant space, a vacant building that somebody that wasn't currently or wasn't able to live within the city limits now has an opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. And then just one more thing, and that both the Vice Chair and Commissioner Wolf has talked about, and we talk about it all the time, is that and Ms. Van Winkle actually brought it up in her talk about how they tried to get, I can't remember on your report, you'd said something about like a donut shop or a pizza place or, just sort of just a little pocket of commercial, and it just never, the spark never got lit. And that, maybe the problem is they don't have that critical mass of residences yet, right? It's possible. And that, sort of we just need that little extra push to get that critical mass of people in the area. But as I talked about in a previous meeting, what concerns me about potentially adding residential component to this area is that the detachment from necessary services and on that particular site, utilities and infrastructure. Whereas we've got that much closer, and yes, more expensive places to live closer to the core of the city, but that if we're going to build on this particular lot or on some other lots nearby, they're detached from schools, from the library, not from recreation necessarily, but any number of other amenities that are more readily available in some of the more built-up areas. That's my bias and has been for a while, so it's not surprising to anybody. Yeah. Any other thoughts? Commissioner Wolf. Yeah.
Also wanted to mention I'm not sure what its official name is, the Chandler Crossings Shopping Center there has been another retail that seems like it has been pretty shaky. They had tremendous turnover there. I haven't been there actually in a couple of years to see what businesses are there now, but perhaps they're doing well now. For quite a while they were having a lot of trouble. And then I just want to say, my answer to both of your questions would be yes. I think residential would be appropriate and desired as a change to the future land use map for the area. And it would be great to get residential units onto the city-owned property. And so if you can come forward with a possible plan for how you and the development department can come forward with a plan, it'd be great to see.
Yeah, Peter, I meant to ask this. I love that there's infrastructure nearby, but the highway is literally right behind the project. I can't tell from the aerial view. Is there a sound wall in that portion?
There is
no,
not.
there's no. Okay, so I think that's another thing to consider as well. I mean, that would be an impact to commercial or whatever ends up on that site in general. Also, what I don't want to see there, I guess, to clarify my previous comments, is like a building with commercial on the bottom and then apartments above, something typically you'd see in a downtown or denser area. I think, a site that's split with housing on one side and maybe, a community center / slight strip of retail would be something that we could consider. Also, when I'm thinking of the other commercial spaces that failed up in this area, I think of a lot of the discussions we had with the form-based code when we were developing that, and a lot of that retail is just so far off of the road that they're not going to get any foot traffic, right? It's just big parking lots in front of retail. I just think that's problematic. You're not getting the eyeballs on there, and you're not getting the people walking by the stores wanting to enter into it. And to Commissioner Wolf's question, I think that Chandler retail strip, I think that's a storage unit now, or almost entirely, or at least in part. So that's an interesting kind of transition of the use of that retail space right there. But I think, when I think about student behavior, I think a lot of students that live up in Chandler, around that area, I suspect that they go downtown on the weekends and they stay downtown, they eat downtown, they go to the bars downtown, they see their friends and stay at their friends' houses downtown. I think that they view Chandler as a place to go up to sleep and to study. I just don't know if they're really exploring a lot of the retail up there. They want to go to where their friends are at, where it's cool to be. And I don't know how to counter that. That's just an observation I've had after living in this area for well over a decade.
Any other thoughts? I've got two more things that just came to mind. I'm sort of piggybacking on what the Vice Chair had commented. If there's a way to start, it's basically like a planned unit development where only a portion of the overall site is developed, but very intensely, right? So as to get that, and maybe over time it spreads out, but that you can get that density that you're looking for, so that it's not spread out and separated by parking lots or separated by grass strips and wide front lawns, right? So to sort of encourage that sort of walkability, and even if it's something where it has to get built with the expectation that some unknown, maybe never arriving commercial node appears, at the very least you've not spread out the entire site with asphalt and detached commercial buildings. And then, on a similar note, I just guess what concerns me most about this is that, and I don't know how ultimately how the finances, how much it's going to sell for and how much it costs to build on, but sort of we have a legacy in this country of, back in post-World War II development where we paid for suburban expansion. We paid for the next suburban expansion with revenues we paid for the current suburban expansion with revenues that we made by selling property the next step out, right? And so we never really caught up with the financing of the current project, because we always had another horizon to cross over and make use of, and to sort of sell the properties there, sort of vacant property, use the revenue gain from that to pay for replacement infrastructure on the current property, or sort of work your way back to the center. And so it probably goes without saying, but that I would be very much concerned about developing this particular property without some expectation that the increased tax revenue that's going to generate pays for the replacement of the eventual replacement of the infrastructure and, sewer and water and so on, when that comes due in 20 years or 30 years or whatever. It's not, it's not anything new, but it is something where, and it's sort of at a very small scale, it sort of mimics that. So, post-World War II suburban expansion of the entire United States, that I'd like to see that, that at the very least we've learned from that if this isn't gonna, if the increased revenue doesn't pay for, future repairs, we don't have anything else to sell beyond this, right? We would expand into the next township or whatever, right? This is sort of the last opportunity to demonstrate that we can do it the right way. It sounds to me like the Vice Chair and Commissioner Wolf are encouraged. I'm guardedly pessimistic, I'm afraid. I'd love to say yes. I've not seen that it just doesn't strike me as the place to do it. So, just one person.
What do you see there instead?
I really don't know. And unfortunately, I can't. I'd very much like to see any effort that the city makes toward trying to attract additional population be focused on existing neighborhoods and where there's existing infrastructure, right? And I know we've talked about the auxiliary dwelling units at length. Another sort of in all my reading about this, that single-family detached zoning is kind of being seen as the bad guy now, right? And you're familiar with the sort of the current literature about this. That is there a way that anything that can be built in, basically just turn the volume up on all of them. R1 becomes R2, R2 becomes R3, whatever. Sort of, R32 becomes R64, so that whatever's available in the next most intense residential zone is available in the one immediately below it. That is a project, sort of if you want to talk about changing zoning, good luck with that. But just by sort of, turning up the volume a little bit or dialing back on some of the restrictions. Again, I live in a single-family detached house, but I'd be comfortable with the idea that there would be a little bit more, activity density. What's the word? Activity in and around me. I don't have an answer, right? I just don't see. I haven't seen anything, or in my own reading, my own work, that just says, "Oh, this is the perfect thing to put in there."
Is office considered at all viable anymore in the development market? I mean, what we're hearing is people are moving away from offices.
Well, I've heard the same, and I speak anecdotally, really, from some of the office developers I've talked to. One that always sticks in my head right now is that there's 1 million square feet of a vacant office space in downtown Lansing.
Right.
And I know the eastern market, there's a lot of office space in the eastern market, the Hazlitt, Okemos,
And
east
that's
part
a
of
large
East.
part of what we had expected to go into this area.
And once, I guess maybe that's just sort of what's driving my pessimistic point of view, is that, is there really a demand for, there's a demand for housing, right?
Yes.
There's no denying that.
Yeah, that, I agree.
Right? Just, are we looking for those places where it can be done closer to the existing amenities? I go back to that a lot, and that's, it's not, but I think that that's actually pretty important. That the problem right now, as I understand it, is that, there's places where this sort of development could be done, or where more intense more intense housing could be provided, but they're not all assembled into one tidy parcel. They're scattered, right? And I'm not talking about just vacant properties. I'm talking about buildings that have sort of come to the end of their useful life and are either due for a refresh or a removal and replacement. And that if there were a way to assemble those as sort of individual groups, all the better. Commissioner Wolf.
Yeah, another somewhat pessimistic thought. When Hawk Nest was developed, it was originally platted as a manufactured housing area, and when that wasn't selling, they came to the city and got it rezoned, and it was promoted as a way to. Well, the lots are quite small compared to most others in East Lansing, certainly any that were being built at that time. The streets are narrow, so it's quite dense in terms of any other single-family housing that was being built, certainly in East Lansing at the time. And it was promoted as being affordable to some extent, to being entry-level housing. And I think it may have worked like that for a while, but if you look at what those houses are selling for now, I don't think they meet the requirements of what we're seeing in our housing study. So even if something similar to that were to be built new now, on the city-owned property, it seems questionable of whether it could be attainable to use that word.
Yeah, will it remain attainable, is your question?
Yeah.
Commissioner Wolf, I didn't hear the location of what you're talking about. The Hawk's Nest, did you say?
Hawk
Yeah,
Nest,
okay.
Right. I don't remember exactly what those sold for when they were new, but I think they were attainable, or at least close to attainable at the time.
Did you say you want to follow up? Yeah, please.
Yeah.
Thanks.
I guess just to clarify, I'm not saying housing or nothing, right? Like I'm just saying, looking at the city, looking at the data that's in front of us, the biggest market gap the city has right now is housing. Like we've been stagnant population-wise, like just under 50,000 people, right, for decades. And I agree. I would love to see more opportunity for housing downtown for families. I think that would be my preferable option. But in lieu of that, I'm just trying to look at other opportunities that we could bring more people into the community. And I realize that there's not a lot of existing infrastructure and stuff there, but it's a mile and a half, 2 miles from downtown, so it's not a half hour away. And it's now the Coleman Road's extended. It's very easy for them to get to Eastwood. It's right there. But I don't know. I'm just thinking, what can we do to increase the amount of housing stock in East Lansing? And this is an opportunity to do that. And to be honest, I would love to see something that changes my mind, that blows me away and is really innovative, like a tech hub campus where they develop and anything like that. I think perhaps would change my mind. But without that in front of us, housing might just be our best option at this point.
Well, can I summarize what I'm hearing?
Please.
Okay, what I'm hearing is I'm hearing generally, go for it, but we're concerned that we're going to be able to get there. Is that kind of?
Yeah. Yes.
And I share the same concerns, and the realities of this are probably not as easy as certainly not nearly as easy as we're making it, or as I'm making it sound. We're just going to rezone everything so it makes sense, and we're going to get the projects we like, and it'll all happen. I know that that's not the case, and the market realities are certainly going to be a limiting factor. To Commissioner Sullivan's point, I think where the staff was at, or where we were at coming out of and certainly where council at the time had communicated, coming out of the housing market, it's like, so we know we have these challenges, and if we don't have any easy solutions, because I certainly prescribe to the same philosophy that you do, Commissioner Bowman, about, we have aging buildings, let's renovate them, let's make them bigger and denser, and if those options aren't on the table, and let's pursue that, but at the same time, if they aren't on the table, what do we do in the immediate term? Should we try for some of these other things, and what it means, and how many units are there, and potentially in the future, what it looks like, and maybe a better offer comes along. I don't know. I do think the city will embark on an RFP at some point, but a targeted RFP, and I think that's part of this discussion tonight, is how does that get crafted?
Sure.
And if something else came along, like Commissioner Sullivan mentioned, I would imagine that there would be interest in that kind of thing.
Could I append
Yeah,
to that? So
please.
first off, doing nothing is not the answer, right? So sort of saying, don't develop this parcel, but don't do anything else I'm not saying that.
Yeah.
However, I am saying, as a potential solution, we've got this nascent form-based code, and
On the shelf.
well, you got a group of potential cheerleaders here. I don't know that that's a solution or the solution, but that does encourage the sort of thing that I'm talking about, and in exactly the area where I would focus put our eye on that ball. This. Again, I'm not lecturing you, but that if council would like some direction from this one individual, potentially the two people to my right, and maybe to my left, that I would say that would be something that I'd like to see move forward, or at least see the light of day with council and some discussion, so that we can talk about whether we're going to do that or not.
Yeah. Another goal, and I've been trying to tackle this one at a time.
I know I'm changing the subject.
No,
but
it's a great lead into this, because it's another aspect. One of the other goals of the near-term housing action plan is to implement the Shaping the Avenue form-based code in a specific geographic area, kind of in the northeast part of downtown, between downtown and Bailey. And I know part of that is Bailey, and I really do not mean to offend anyone that lives in Bailey. If I'm naming the wrong parts, I just don't know all
so
that.
you got at least two residents here, and
Right.
I don't see that either of us is at all offended.
So, but plugging that into an area that's closer to the downtown, and that's also one of the goals. So I don't want to lose sight of that either. I'm just today was the focus on this, and I was hoping to follow it up in the coming meetings with that initiative. We're actually bringing on 2 interns this summer, and I'm hoping to have some more to really dig into. We're going to dig into the other goals in the plan, and that's one of them that I think we need to get some wheels on and start moving, because it's there. The ordinance language is there. It's just plugging it into an area and implementing it.
Right.
And we had talked, I think, now months ago about strategic implementation of that in a smaller geographic area versus the entire city. I can just tell you, in my experience in an adjacent municipality, it was challenging to do a full-on, let's adopt form-based code, and the narrowing of the focus went to a specific geographic area.
Right.
And that seemed a little easier, like more palatable. And even from an administrative perspective, I find that easier, like as a way to tackle it. So I don't want to lose sight of that, and I don't want to. So multi-pronged approach. We also want to do that.
Okay. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Menzer on item 7.1?
Could I summarize very briefly?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. What I'd like to do is take what I'm hearing today, and I think good and my initial take is good and bad. So there's some support for housing in those areas. What that looks like, we don't know yet, but I think there's some support to at least investigate, not just on the city parcel, but also the northern tier area.
Yes.
But also there are valid concerns that I do think need to be addressed or need to be shared, and I can summarize some of the things that have been talked about tonight.
Good.
And ultimately transmitting a letter to council that says those things, and then they'll have some direction from the planning commission on where they want to go. And at that point, we'll have we'll attend the council meeting and get some further direction, and we'll see which way kind of that veers off to start with. In the meantime, I would like to take a look, for when this does come back, taking a look at some of the kind of, I'll call them failures for now, but what the current state of the endeavors, the projects that endeavored to include mixed use.
Right.
So it's been a while. I mean, I've driven up there a little bit. I'm just not quite sure what was proposed and what it became. I did see the storage unit that Commissioner Sullivan mentioned. So I'll engage with our friends at Bath Township and some of the people that have been here longer than me that could probably tell the story better and give a more holistic view for next time this comes up. But thank you very much for the discussion. I think this is hopefully really helpful for everybody. It was helpful for me.
That actually provides a very deft segue to the next item, the Bath Township Master Plan.
copies of this.
This was a great conversation. Good lead-in to the Bath Township plan. As Peter had mentioned, we wanted to do a little bit of updating or reminding you of what the process is to even get to the approval of a master plan before we talk about the Bath Township plan. So there's really a pre-master plan process, and it's called notice to plan. So the notice to plan is requesting cooperation from those who we send it to comment and be on this ride with us to make sure they can give us input on anything that we might not be aware of on the surrounding communities, any entity that would be part of the planning process. So, whoops. We're going to start at the beginning, I think. We're at the very bottom. Sorry about that. That is it not in the right order?
No, I said earlier, I'd like to talk about the Bath plan first.
Okay. Very good. I wasn't aware of that. So we'll go ahead and talk about the Bath plan first.
Okay, thanks.
So the Bath Township plan is in the part of the planning process that I'll be talking about later. And in this slide, I'm showing just the area that surrounds the city of East Lansing. As Taylor had mentioned before, the 425 acres of the sod farm was recently put into a conservation easement, so that will have no development in the future. The properties that are shown in the pink, hot pink, on the west side of Chandler Road, you can see a property that we've talked about quite heavily tonight, Chandler Crossing, with the commercial development and the high-density student housing residential in hot pink, and that's under the what they call mixed-use land use. And they don't have a clear definition in their master plan of what they're considering that being mixed use. However, I did speak with the planner at Bath Township, and we talked a little bit about this particular zoning around the city was the same, or land use around the city is the same as what was in the current master plan that's in place for Bath Township from 2014. He is new with the Bath Township, so this is an area that he had mentioned that they're clearly going to need to look at sooner than later, even though they're at the end of the master planning process. As you know, ours took 5 years, theirs took 3 years, and they focused on areas that had the most urgent area of planning need. And so this area, because a lot of the area for Chandler Crossing is actually in a 425 agreement with Bath Township. So that has a 30 to 50 year agreement. So that's pretty much what they'll have for the next 20, 30 years. So they will be looking at that again in the future. Of course, other areas of hot pink are the same thing. They're looking at future uses, mixed use. Right now, it's purely student housing in most of the pink area, or apartments that are higher density and mostly student housing. The orange area is high density residential. That is allowing for basically 7 to 12 units per acre. And that currently is a student housing development. The areas that are kind of the gold color are a medium density residential use, and they are at a 4 dwelling units per acre, so not a lot of density around that area. The green areas are public land, open space, and will remain that way. And if you want to go to the next slide. Some of the notable things that came out of the master plan that are important to the city of East Lansing are the township is interested in expanding sidewalks, trails, and bike lanes. As we all know, we have a lot of wonderful trails in the northern tier, and this is an opportunity that we can work with them on maybe connecting up some of those trails. The township will continue to monitor any changes in status of creating an I-96 interchange. This is one of the items that is in our master plan as well. If that interchange is ever to go forward in the future, which it may not, we've been waiting for this for years, but it will really change what that corridor looks like on Chandler. They're looking at also considerations of impact of new and expanded development along Chandler Road. This is, of course, going to be largely impacted by an I-96 interchange and access to this area. And if we want to go on to the process. So, as I was saying before, the pre-master planning process is sending out a notice to plan. And that goes out to all of the areas that you would expect. It goes to all the areas that entities that you would expect would be planning around our community or within our community. So it would start out with any unit of government contiguous to the city, regional planning commission, county planning commissions, each public utility company, railroad companies, transportation companies. We do have a master street plan, so we would have to send it out to that, or a major street plan. Any government entity that registers with us that they want to be noticed, we would also have to send it to them. After the master plan has been drafted, there are some other important steps that need to be taken. Basically, the Planning Commission submits the proposed master plan to the City Council for review and comment. The master plan process may not proceed unless the legislative body approves the distribution of the proposed master plan. So this is after the city has gone out and worked with the community on master planning process. If the legislative body approves the proposed master plan for distribution, the secretary to the Planning Commission will distribute the proposed master plan to the same entities that got the notice to plan. The proposed master plan can be distributed in the same manner as the notice to plan, either by first-class mail or in person, but it can also be distributed electronically. The entities receiving the proposed master plan have 63 days from the time they receive it to provide comments to the city. Before approving a proposed master plan, the Planning Commission must hold at least one public hearing. This public hearing cannot be held until after the end of the 63 days allowed to the entities to provide us information. Of course, all their comments are advisory only, but we have taken those into consideration when reviewing the master plan. A notice must be sent to the newspaper of general circulation at least 15 days prior to the meeting. The public hearing notice has to have the time and the place of the public hearing. The Planning Commission must also submit a notice to the entities in the same manner as they submitted the notice to plan. So really there are two options for approving a master plan. The Planning Commission will always review, and approve the master plan. The approval of the master plan must be done by resolution of the Planning Commission carried by affirmative votes of 2/3 of the commission. And the resolution must have certain things that are stated in it. It has to explicitly list the document, the written document, the maps, and the signed resolution by the chairperson. The resolution will have what the votes were and will become part of the document. It has to be placed in the document either at the very beginning or the very end of the document. Approving the master plan option 2, the city council does have an option to express their desire to be the final approving body or denial of the master plan. They have to, by resolution, assert that desire to do that. The city council, if they've asserted the right to do that, the plan will go to the city council for final action after the planning commission has taken action on it. A statement recording the city council's approval of the master plan must be signed by the city clerk and also by the mayor. Once this has been done, this will be placed in the document next to the resolution that was signed by the planning commission. And that's it. So this is the process that we would take if this whole northern tier process comes to fruition and we do look at the master plan change for that area. It won't be the same as what we did and started in 2013 and ended in 2018. It will be more considered a sub-plan that will be changing the plan. And we will have to go through this entire process as well.
Thanks.
Yes.
Questions for Ms. Schmidt? Okay, this is sort of an ongoing process, isn't it?
Yes. Any questions about Bath Township's plan?
Any questions about, specifically about our potential role? And now, any questions about, or either about Bath Township's document or their plan? Sounds like that.
All right, great.
Thank you. It was interesting to read from a different point of view, sort of, and I'm not nearly as familiar with Bath as I am with the city of East Lansing. So there's a couple places that I thought I probably ought to go and see what that looks like on the ground, as opposed to from this pretty blue color,
Right.
right? Right.
Right,
You know,
and
and Google Earth can only, or maps or whatever, can only give you so much perspective.
Exactly.
So.
And, you know, as we all know, these are 20-year plans,
Right.
so a lot can change in 20 years. Okay.
Commissioner Wagner, did you have a?
I did not.
Oh, okay.
Great,
Thanks.
thank you.
That, unless, Mr. Menzer, were you going to, no, okay, thank you. Then that will move us on to item 9, Commissioner concerns. Does anybody have any concerns they'd like to raise? Okay, I'll chat with you afterwards. Then if not, then a motion to adjourn would be in order.
So moved.
Second?
It's been moved by Commissioner Williams and seconded by Commissioner Wolf. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. And those opposed? We are adjourned at 8:58.